And what's happening, everyone? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast. My name is Tony Mazur. Once again, thank you for listening to this podcast. If you are on my Patreon, if you are not, you can subscribe at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. You can subscribe for, well, free if you want to. But I'm not going to give you a lot of free content over there. The good stuff you're going to have to pay for. I have a $3 tier, a $5 tier, and a $10 tier, which gives you extra content. If you are checking this podcast out for free on the aforementioned Patreon or the major podcast platforms such as Spotify and what I'm showing here on my screen is Apple Podcasts, go hit subscribe. Give me a 5-star rating if you do like it. If not, don't say anything at all, please. Once again, I am Tony Mazur, and joining me on the podcast today is he calls himself a starving artist. He's an actor and someone who I've been recently hooked up with, and his name is Cal Yeater. Cal, good to have you on the podcast.
Glad to be here.
So I wanted to share something. I saw something. So we're Facebook friends, and which by the way, I want to share this your YouTube page because I always like to get the plugs out of the way. So go check Kel out over on YouTube. There you go. And I see you've been putting a lot of music up on your Facebook too as well, right?
Right. I use my YouTube for just random stuff, a lot of, I guess you'd say conspiracy stuff just to get people thinking. A lot of it I know is a bunch of, a lot of it shouldn't be taken seriously, but I like to get people thinking.
Oh, of course. Well, I mean that's the beauty of it, and but it's always fun to just poke the bear. But we kind of saw that a couple of years ago when you start poking the bear enough, and then they're like, "Oh, well, no, we're going to start censoring you." I was listening to a podcast today, and they were saying how YouTube, like 15 years ago, was totally the Wild West. As long as you're not sharing pornography, you could basically get away with anything on YouTube. And then there was that thing a couple of years ago where they were talking about mis and disinformation, and then they really started combing through. And I was getting notices from 3 years ago. I did a podcast and we mentioned something about COVID masks, and all of a sudden it got flagged and taken down. And I'm not big enough
Mm.
for it to be monetized or anything, but it said you had COVID misinformation about this. I'm like, how did you find that? 3 years. I understand their algorithms, but they really went in there, and it was really crazy. But yeah, no, it's you never know what's going to happen. I do want to share this because I saw this when we became Facebook friends, and I saw a picture here. How old is this photo right here that I'm going to show and talk about it for the people only listening?
Oh God. Okay, so that was about 2014 or 2015. I actually went to go meet him with my friend. He goes by Blind Buffalo Bill. But we went to go meet him, and
Now,
my
when you no,
friend
when you
Bill.
say him for the people listening, that's Ron Jeremy,
Yes.
and yeah, this is definitely. So he's got his T-shirt on. I'm just describing it for everybody. He's got his T-shirt and his brand of rum that he was selling at the time.
Yeah, I don't drink, so I didn't get any of that.
So how was it? How was meeting Ron Jeremy? Because I have a story I want to bring up too.
Well, it was actually pretty interesting because I went there with my friend Billy. And my friend Billy, Ron was really interested in learning his story because, when Billy was 12, he wound up, shooting himself in the face and, he lived. Yeah, it was,
Goodness.
yeah. Yeah, so Ron was he brought us back behind the ropes. We hung out for a while. It was really, I got him to sign my copies of I had a Toxic Avenger 4. I had a copy of a movie called Poultrygeist Night of the Chicken Dead. Like, I'm a very big fan of trauma films, B flicks, stuff like that, and got him to sign it. But we hung out for a little while, but eventually, we got kicked out.
Now let me ask you: did he smell?
He didn't. There was no weird smell, but shaking his hand was very questionable. Like,
Like
but I
where
did.
his hand was and where it's been for many
Exactly.
decades.
Yes, exactly. Like,
Usually at the buffet line. And that's not just a fat joke. He says that in his memoir. So I'll give my Ron Jeremy story, which is ironic because not only have I met Ron Jeremy, and I'll show it here when I share the screen because I'm a moron. So there's you, and there's me. Now you're wearing a Space Ghost shirt as I do this podcast. I wore a Space Ghost shirt when I talked to Ron Jeremy. How weird is that?
That's extremely coincidental. Like, that's one thing about me is like, and I don't really talk about this a lot because like people would normally think that this kind of stuff is crazy, but weird, strange coincidences are always happening around me. Like even me, getting connected with Steve Joyner. And, ironically, they have a con going on in Akron where they're wanting to bring me. My dad lives right in Talmadge. So,
Oh, well, I was just in Talmadge last week. Yes, very that's very ironic, and you're down in South Carolina.
yeah.
So, but yeah, well, I wanted. So, here's the interesting thing about the Ron Jeremy story. So, it was 2008. Now, that picture was from a decade later, but in 2008, I'm at O'Hare Airport. We were supposed to get on a flight. It was with my dad and my grandmother, and we were coming out of Cleveland. We had a layover to go out to California, and we had a layover in Chicago. And it was a massive thunderstorm that was happening in Cleveland into Chicago. So by the time we did land at O'Hare, our flight to Orange County got or it had already taken off by then. So they had to have people pulling my grandmother's luggage off because she had medication and Coumadin and everything that she needed. So we were like, all right, I guess we're going to be stuck in Chicago until the next flight to California the next morning. So uh, we were at one of those Hudson News places at the airport, and I'm looking for things. And ironically, there was a Bill Cosby book that was right next to it, and it was a Ron Jeremy book. And I'm thinking, we have a 3.5, 4 hour flight from Chicago to John Wayne Airport in Orange County. I don't really want to read anything too heavy. It's 2008. You're dealing with the recession around that time, and there was an election coming up. Like, I just want to read something silly, something nonsensical. And there was nothing more nonsensical than a Ron Jeremy memoir. So I picked it up. And it was funny. We were seated separately. My grandma looks over and says, "Oh, isn't it nice? Tony's reading a book. What's he reading?" And my dad's looking over, going, "I can't believe you bought that book." So 10 years later, I get a message from someone who says, "Would you want to do a show with Ron Jeremy?" And I'm like, "A show as in a comedy show?" It's like, yes, 'cause, we have to put that out there. And so yeah, there it is, May 4th, 2018, and I'm right there. There's Ron Jeremy and his rum that you had on the T-shirt, and I'm at the bottom. And it was a comedy show with the quote unquote great Ron Jeremy. And every single person, when I mentioned it, said the exact same thing. "Oh, he does stand-up comedy?" And I'm like, "Yeah, not expecting too much from it." So what normally happens, as you probably know, being an actor and being around this, is a comedy show has the headliner who everyone pays to go see. Then you have the middle act, and then maybe you have a guest set, maybe two, depending on what's going on, and you have a host of the show. So it's this random rock venue out northeast of me in Ohio, and they, again, how it normally is, a host and then the acts and then your headliner. And they're like, "Are you guys ready to see Ron Jeremy?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, yeah. Well, here he is." And you're like, "Wait a second, Ron Jeremy's the first act coming out here." And he comes out and he tells a quick, like, old Borscht Belt dirty sex joke. And everyone's like, "Ha ha." And then the second joke is, third joke is, "He's not really funny, is he?" And then he pulls out a harmonica and starts doing these old, again, Yiddish limericks from back in the day. And then they have all the comics that went up there, including people who had never done stand up before. People were getting restless at the show. So I eventually did 20 minutes of street jokes to get people laughing again. I got that picture with Ron Jeremy, and I got an autographed poster, which I've never hung up. It's still in my room. And we left. And I didn't want to see the rest of the show because apparently he came out and did a Q&A. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that's why some of these guys who are long time, whether porn actors or actual actors who want to do stand up, are doing so as this second career, I guess. I don't know. I've seen a number of former child actors who want to do stand up now and think that's an easy gig to do. It's really not. It's a completely different brain hemisphere.
Oh, definitely. Like I got the feeling that a lot of these guys go on stage and like they basically, I don't know, sometimes I'm watching their mannerisms and it's almost like, they consumed something before they went on stage.
Well,
It
yeah.
basically allows them to have control over the crowd.
Well, and I think a lot of it is when you are a sitcom actor, because I worked with some really funny guys who not the best stand-up. Just because you were funny on a certain TV show from 30, 40, 50 years ago doesn't necessarily mean that translates to you being funny. Now, I'll say this, someone like Jimmy J.J. Walker, who was on Good Times, was a comedian for a while before he even got the show. So all of his lines and everything he was doing, it was written for him, but he was a funny guy anyway. So he can go on the road. They pay him enough money to say dynamite, and he can go on and continue doing it. But if you're another certain acts like Jeremy Piven, who was quirky on a TV show from 20 years ago, doesn't necessarily mean you can go up on stage. And I'm not necessarily ripping on Jeremy Piven, but it kind of is a weird look when you go on stage and thinking that, oh, I can be funny because I was funny on a TV show. That's not necessarily always going to be the case.
Oh no, not at all. Like it's an act and it can either be a really good one or a really bad one. You know what I mean? Like how should I put this? Yeah, because comedians, it's not the same atmosphere as it used to be. Like there's no more Mitch Hedbergs. There's no more. Uh, I mean, yeah, comedy. It's just not the same anymore. Ever since the atmosphere changed a few years ago. People are afraid to say certain things. People are afraid to be offensive now.
Well, I will. I'll push back against that respectfully because I think there's a different incentive structure now. There was a time, uh, I would say a lot of it was between 2013 and around 2022. It was probably a good 10-year run of a lot of politically correct stuff. And you're afraid to say certain words on stage, not even really offensive words, but just misgendering somebody, calling someone saying someone in the crowd, and that they would come up and punch you after the show. You're in the meet and greet area. It's like, hey, great show, great show tonight, and someone just socks you in the face. Didn't happen to me, although I did it. I've had a couple of times where I've done stand up, and I remember these two girls that had a problem with a couple of my jokes on stage, and they're like, "So what you said was really sexist today." Really, what did I say? Well, you said, and I don't even remember the bits, and I'm like, no, 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 no. Understand, those jokes are not ripping on women. That's my misunderstanding of women. That's part of the act. Oh, okay. Well, what about this one? And I'm like, again, you're misunderstanding of what I'm trying to say and all this. And I'm thinking, I'm being lectured to by two women at a random bar in Akron, Ohio on a Tuesday night. And 5 minutes later, I see both of them on their hands and knees in the bathroom snorting cocaine off a toilet seat. And I'm thinking, so you're going to question me on my morals? So it's
Eh,
I will say, if you've noticed, a lot of the comics, the Andrew Schultz, the Shane Gillis of the world, that they're still going on podcasts, they're still being fairly offensive, and yet Shane Gillis is a Bud Light spokesman. So there's and hosting SNL, the show that 5 years ago had fired him for offensive comments. So I think there's a different incentive structure where people are kind of just putting their middle fingers up and saying, "Yeah, no, it doesn't work anymore like that."
I hope. I hope everything goes back to how it used to be. We need more Andrew Dice Clays.
I mean, he's still around, and people. There are funny comics. The one interesting thing about Dice was he was an actor, and his character, the Andrew Dice Clay, it was kind of an amalgamation of Jerry Lewis as Buddy Love in the original Nutty Professor. That Dice character was one of his personalities. He had the other one where he was the actual Jerry Lewis and Nutty Professor, where he's hell, what's going on? And then he did a Travolta because that was really big at the time. And it just so happened that by the very cynical baby boomer early 1980s, that Dice character really seemed to work out. And then you had Sam Kinison, you had others who were very subversive for their time. But then it got away, and there were a lot more comics that were doing more storytelling, more incorporating themselves in it, as opposed to, I don't know, being funny. I'd like to see you be funny. Be funny as a comic. Make me laugh. Because ultimately, a comedian who goes on stage, you are comedy clubs are nothing but a bar that has a stage and someone cracking jokes. So you're a joke blower, as Bill Hicks used to call them. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. That's why when I go on stage, I don't do politics. I don't do political jokes because I don't want to split the audience. If I split the audience, it's because some people like my material of being funny and some people don't think I'm funny. I'd rather you all think I'm funny or none of you think I'm funny than splitting people down the middle because of straight politics.
Let me. Okay. Alex Jones. Do you think he's Bill Hicks?
Uh,
You've
I,
heard this before.
Oh yeah. No. I understand that. So there's an interesting theory for people who don't know that Bill Hicks, who had pancreatic cancer back, was diagnosed in 1993, not long after Waco, which is right around the time when Alex Jones started making waves in the public access television circuit. Bill Hicks was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in I think June of '93, ended up dying in February of '94. So right after that, that's when you started seeing this Alex Jones character, also from the Austin, Texas area, pop up. I don't think he is. I think I can get into a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot we can get into. Obviously, recently there's the JFK, the RFK, the MLK files being released, but I'm going to go with Occam's razor and say probably not.
I know. I just, like I said, I love conspiracy, even if it's silly. Like, I live for it.
Now, so I know Sam Tripoli. I've known Sam for a number of years. He has the Tinfoil Hat podcast, and is very, very, very funny on stage. You want to talk about a conspiracy guy? He has been the guy for a long time. And what are some of your favorite conspiracy theories? Because when I worked in radio, we brought this up on the air, and I'm thinking, oh, I have several, but if I say them on the radio, on regular radio, it's 9:23 in the morning. I will be fired by 9:30 if I said some of these. So, what are your favorite ones that aren't approved by the norm? So, when I say that, I think it's understood that the approved conspiracy theory that Oswald did not kill Kennedy is a prevailing mindset. That Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself is a prevailing normie mindset where just random people say, yeah, that doesn't make sense. But what are some where you would say it at a party and people go, what are you talking about?
Okay, one of my favorite ones is I don't remember if it was between 2017 to 2019. A bunch of actors all of a sudden started dying at either the age of 59 or 69 of pancreatic cancer. And it
Hmm.
all started happening. Alan Rickman, David Bowie,
Glenn
Lemmy
Fry from the
Kilmister.
Eagles.
Exactly. Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead, all pancreatic cancer, and they were all around the same age. It's just, yeah. Most people shoot me down when I bring that up. But one of my other favorite conspiracies is if you go on my YouTube page, watch. You don't have to watch the whole thing, but it's the full Gotthard Tunnel opening ceremony where they have CERN in the Swiss Alps, and it was a ceremony for the opening of the train tunnel that brings the workers down into CERN. And the ceremony was attended by world leaders that were all involved in the G20, the Paris. Hello. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. But
I'm just playing it in the background for people.
oh yeah, but this ceremony, if you actually start scrolling towards the end, that's when it gets really ominous because they got this dude, like, like this was attended by, world leaders that they go and attend these ceremonies and then they come back and write our laws and tell us how to live. But this is like, you know, I know people have their culture and I'm not religious, but this looks like some kind of, demonic ceremony.
Well, that's where, well, getting back to Alex Jones, where he snuck into Bohemian Grove, and the Richard Nixon tape from back in the '70s, where Richard Nixon said I'm not going to use the word, but he said that Bohemian Grove was, well, I'll say it just for the purposes, but he said it's the faggiest goddamn place he's ever seen. and
I've heard the quote.
and these random things that were happening in these cult rituals and this burning of effigies that were happening at Bohemian Grove. And yeah, it to think that there are elite pedophile rings and it, boy, am I going to get my channel I don't really care, but it's the a lot of this stuff, and it's interesting when you talk about conspiracy theories because when there was an approved narrative for a long time when you only had three networks, when you had ABC, NBC, CBS, and you had a couple of newspapers, a couple of radio stations. So the access to information, unless you were somebody who was a ravenous reader at a library, you really didn't get an opportunity to dig into a lot of this stuff because you heard Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite and Peter Jennings. And they would give us our news, and you would read whatever was approved by the New York Times. And eventually, when the internet opened in the '90s, and you had forums, and then by the 2000s, you had YouTube and the access to social media expanding in 2010s. Now you have people who are really digging into things that you're like, wait, it challenges their cognitive dissonance that they don't know that there's more to this that's going on right now. And you say, wait a second here. No, I was told this. And then once you start to crack that first shell, they're like, well, what else haven't they told us? If I don't believe this story, then I got to believe that everything else they've told me is also a lie. It could be
Have you heard
dangerous
of
in
Project?
some ways, but it's definitely a rabbit hole.
Have you ever heard of Project Mockingbird?
Oh, yeah. Talk about that.
Oh yeah, Project Mockingbird. Like literally, they have all of these news channels all across the country repeating the same messages over and over and over again. So even if it's total BS, people still believe it because it's repeated over the airwaves and spread. Like like there was this one montage that I used to have. I have to find it again. But even the message of, a child's happiness is priceless, especially on a birthday, that got repeated the same line over and over again over hundreds of stations. And I'm like, how is this news? How is this, letting people know what's really going on? It's not. You're just, giving people a bunch of crap to listen to so they feel like they're informed.
Yeah, and the how things were filtered. Now, there was one that was going around was an actual Nexstar thing. So the company Nexstar, which is a TV network, they had a thing where all of their anchors had to read from the same script, and I think that's a lot of it where people were sharing that for the, as Jacob Chansley calls it, the Mockingbird media, and they all said that it's like we here at such and such station believe in the standards and practices and the norms and then it just goes through this whole montage of like 50 different stations that said the exact same thing with the exact same verbiage. But it goes way deeper than that of how news gets aggregated, how it gets promoted, and that expert opinion. I talk about this on my podcast a lot. Was how at one time with the advent of cable news, well, even before that, you had the point counterpoint. You had you had Buckley versus Gore Vidal back in the '60s, and you had other debate shows, the McLaughlin Group back in the day, which was greatly parodied by Dana Carvey on SNL back in the day. And then you culminating with the late '90s and 2000s with Crossfire on CNN, Hannity and Colmes on Fox News. But then eventually those shows went by the wayside. And is it because people don't want to hear arguments? No, because go on ESPN right now. The day we're recording this, it's the day after there's a lot of controversial football games that were going on last night. And people are talking about, is the NFL rigged? Are they looking to push the Chiefs over the top and get them to win the Super Bowl? Blah, blah, blah. So there's always a need for debate shows, but why on news shows that there really isn't much debate? And it's because it seemed like they wanted that expert opinion where we're all on the same page as far as we get our talking points and our approved narrative out there, as opposed to, and so why is that? It's because anybody else who disagrees with that approved narrative is pushed outside that Overton window of acceptable discourse. And so if anyone is saying, hey, I believe this, and they're like, that's some crazy person because we over here believe this, and that person is just shouting conspiracy theories. And I think a lot of people should realize the term conspiracy theory was a Fed created word to label people and demoralize them and dehumanize them after the assassination of President Kennedy in 1963. So if you said, "Hey, I don't necessarily believe that Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy," they say, "Well, you must be some kind of conspiracy theorist." And then that turned into, for decades, if you were a conspiracy theorist, that means, oh, well, you're some nutcase who we can't take seriously.
Well, yeah, that's actually a really big problem because, once if you have the reach to make people believe a certain way, and they ruin people's lives over this stuff, like hold on, I think I lost you. Hello?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. My phone just kept blinking on me. But yeah, like the problem is, especially with these media outlets, they label people incorrectly all the time. And if you go on the media and you repeat it over and over again that someone is, you know, uh, based on your opinion, a racist, a sexist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, anything like that, people are going to believe it, even if it's not your intention, at all of being, offensive to any group of people.
Yeah,
If
and
that makes
it's perfect how they do that, and it's the good news is, regardless of what people thought that happened in the 2024 election, what proved it is legacy media is dying in front of us. And it's actually dying a quicker death than I think a lot of people were expecting. That in 2020, people didn't really have an opportunity, and that there was an approved narrative as what was going on around COVID and everything. And they're like, well, we got to find the latest information. I guess I'll check out CNN. Well, one of the things I always bring up is, let's say, for example, one of the big podcasts in the world is the Joe Rogan Experience. If Joe Rogan said, you know what, I got enough on my plate right now. I prefer doing UFC. I prefer doing whatever. I'm going to end the Joe Rogan Experience today. That's it, no more. His audience is not going to say, well, shoot, huh. I was a big Rogan fan. I listened to him for like 10 years. Goodness, maybe even longer than that. I guess I'm going to go watch Anderson Cooper on CNN. No, they're not going back there. So the audience who are listening to and watching legacy media are literally dying off. And they're not going to be replaced by anything. The fact that CNN just last week was beaten in the ratings by SpongeBob SquarePants reruns proves that people are going elsewhere for their news. And now legacy media is panicking right in front of us. They don't know what to do. They realize, obviously everybody knows that their ratings are going down and their viewership is going down, and everything is going by the wayside, which affects sponsorship, which affects keeping staff on board. So a lot of them are still doubling down and still pushing garbage, but others are like, we're going to have to gut half of our department right now because people are going elsewhere. That Gen Z are going to TikTok, they're going to Twitter or X or whatever, they're going to Facebook and YouTube and all these other means of distribution that will also eventually become the legacy media. That Twitter and Facebook and TikTok will eventually become legacy media, and something else will eventually replace it down the road. But as it stands now, we are at an interesting crossroads, and it proved that that social media, that podcasts, and non-traditional media really changed things in real time in the last year or so, and that's going to be the standard going forward.
Well, my awakening happened I'd say about 2015 when Donald Trump first ran. I was actually at work and they had MSNBC on. And, I watched it every morning because I'd always go to work a couple hours before I was supposed to because I had nothing better to do. But they had Mika and Joe in the
Ah,
morning.
Morning Joe.
Yep. And Mika literally said that Donald Trump is undermining the thoughts of the population. And then she ended that with, that's our job.
Mm.
Like, yeah, you can go onto YouTube, type Mika, our job. It's right there. Like, other people have documented this. They literally said that it is their job to
Gate
control the
gatekeep.
thoughts in my. Yes.
They're gatekeeping, and especially when you have Joe Scarborough, who was a congressman and very high profile at one time, and then Mika's father. It's just you just go through the rabbit hole of what that is true state media. The fact that Joe Biden last year did his State of the Union, and then on a Saturday, and by Monday, Joe Scarborough's up there going, "That's the best Joe Biden," and F you if you think that, and he's
Mhm.
like, "This is the best we're going to have." And then a couple of months later, he's literally crapping himself on a stage at a debate, and then they're like, I don't know what we have to do. So you're just again, it is that Operation Mockingbird. It is you continue repeating the lie. And when you look at the godfather of propaganda and Edward Bernays, that they've been pushing this for a long time, and you continue repeating lies to the point where you think that Sinbad starred in a movie where he was a genie in the mid 90s. What are you
There
talking about? The Berenstain Bears or Berenstein Bears?
Sinbad actually did a video about that where they made it look like a VHS from 1995 where he played a genie, but it was like one of those college humor or Funny
Yes.
or Die
Yeah, it was
videos.
Funny or Die. Yeah,
Yeah.
which
Oh
was
man, I
which was
love them
funny.
guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it's and that's that those are the silly conspiracy theories. There's another one I've been really digging into, and because I like tweaking people with things that I would have assumed a lot of people have woken up. We have the means of distribution, as I said, but there's a lot of normies out there that still believe a lot of debunked stuff. There's even things you could talk about Operation Northwoods. You talk about Teapot Dome, MK Ultra, the USS Liberty. There's a lot of things that were called conspiracy theories at one time, and they're like, okay, yeah, no, that actually was the truth. Here's another one. This kind of shakes people up. I actually have a meme here. I'm going to post it on social media pretty soon. But I am a Helen Keller denier. And it's funny because when you're a child and you start realizing, you go, oh, well, Helen Keller, she was this deaf, dumb, and blind girl, but wrote all these great. She didn't write any of this. She was the pinball wizard, the Who, the deaf, dumb, and blind kid sure plays a mean pinball. And you say, well, how did all this happen? Well, I watched The Miracle Worker and Anne Sullivan. Oh, it's because Anne Sullivan, who was a communist op and was pushing a lot of this stuff. And by the way, there was some of the Helen Keller writings were actually burned in Weimar, Germany, or afterward, back in the 1930s. But she was a communist op, and that Helen Keller was just this vessel, this vessel in order to push this. And again, every time I'll bring that up to people, and they're like, what are you talking about? And it challenges their cognitive dissonance. And my thing is, do your own research. And I understand we weren't allowed to do our own research 5 years ago, but I tell people, hey, just look at it. Just look at it and see if you believe the approved narrative. Again, Occam's razor, there could be opportunities where maybe the story that we all know is real, and maybe all the other conspiracy theories were just trying to justify something, but it wouldn't hurt to research it, would it?
Nobody questions anything. They just read what they read in school and they just go on to believe that Helen Keller, no offense to her, but she wouldn't have been capable of writing any of her own stories or any of her own however you would call it. But yeah, it's sad that they used her as that face.
Well, they did it with Anne Frank as well. That the Anne Frank diary, this is another one that really gets people pissed off on social media, is when you say you do realize that the ink that was the pen that was used to write the Diary of Anne Frank did not exist. That particular ballpoint pen was not around until the 1950s. Yet she supposedly died in 1943 and wrote all these things in her journal. But it was her father who helped commission these writings and pushing it. And then it didn't matter if you were going to a Jewish school, a Catholic school, Christian school, or just a public school. You read the Diary of Anne Frank when you were in like fifth grade. And I'm like, okay, can we at least challenge the approved narrative? Nope, can't question it. It's going on. By the way, this year is 30 years since the Oklahoma City bombing. And I'm trying to get Richard Booth, who is from the Libertarian Institute, on my podcast. And he's the one who's been really debunking a lot of this going on. And I even brought it up to my wife one day. And I said, this was going on. I've been watching this. She's like, don't tell me you're an OKC truther as well. Again, we got to look into it and can't just accept the approved narrative that's been pushed onto us for 3+ decades now.
Well, if I
I know it's
remember
getting
correct,
heavy podcast.
yeah, if I remember correctly, even though I don't approve of what Timothy McVeigh did, I honestly hate using his name. Like, I don't approve of how he did it, you know, but it was just, he was just angry at, how the government was treating people in general, like, and that was back in like what, 93, 94. I'm only 35, so I was like real young when that happened. But, yeah, like he didn't have to blow up that building.
Well, but saying that there was John Doe and there was all these other things, and that that particular federal building had documents with the Clintons involving with Whitewater and Vince Foster and all this other stuff, and that day that there were kind of like with 9/11, that there were people who weren't in the office, that they just so happened that of all days to take a vacation day. So, and to say that Timothy McVeigh, maybe he was some kind of pawn, that they claimed that because he went over to Waco in 93 and he saw what was going on, then you start getting into conspiracy theories with Waco and say, who's the one who shot first? Did the Bradley tanks go into the Waco compound, or did the Branch Davidians, were they the ones who started the fire? Was there pedophilia? Was there child molestation? Was there a methamphetamine lab on the property? Then you go back even further with Ruby Ridge, and again, the reason a lot of this stuff is out there is we didn't get the full story. You're told to drop it. I mean, you see this with school shootings, for example, that go on right now, and if they don't follow the branches of the approved narrative, then it goes away pretty quick. There was a school shooting last week. We've already stopped talking about it because it didn't fit a particular narrative. So it's crazy. I wish I didn't feel like I'm going crazy, but the good news, the white pill going forward, is that there are people like you and me who have been pushing this stuff for a number of years and saying, I'm not saying you have to believe that the Diary of Anne Frank was a fabrication created by a Jewish writer over a decade after she died, and I'm not saying you have to believe that Anne Sullivan was this, and I'm not saying you have to. All I'm saying, like with MK Ultra, just look into it a little bit. Just peek into what's been going on, and if you come away with the what everybody knows about it, then that's fine. At least you had an opportunity to get your narrative. But you realize, I think a lot of people, their views on religion, their views on history, their views on science are from a third grade level, and that they really have not progressed since then. That we were taught something when we were in grade school and elementary school, and then we've just kept that going and said, nope, that's what I was taught, and I can't be challenged otherwise. Otherwise, my brain's going to short circuit.
One thing that I've been told, and oh, by the way, one thing people stopped talking about all of a sudden. Remember those drones that were everywhere?
Oh yeah, the New Jersey drones.
Well, no, they were here too. I actually got a video on my phone of one of them, but it was like it was weird because like it was I looked and it looked like a big star, but when I was putting my phone to it and zoomed in, it kept like pulsating like it was in like orbing, like it looked like an orb. Like, and at first I thought, that people were just, I didn't take it too seriously until I saw it myself. Like, I'll actually send you the video after the podcast so you could see what I'm talking about. But I got one on video myself.
And we didn't get an answer from it, right?
Right, I'm waiting. Trump said he was going to say something about it. I'm waiting.
Yeah, there was the drones because what a way to cap off 2024 is that we have drones flying over New Jersey, over the Carolinas, over from Detroit all the way to the East Coast, and couldn't were we to shoot them down? What are they? We had a Chinese spy balloon cross the country 2 years ago. Nope, don't talk about it. We'll spend like $500,000 or whatever it was to shoot a missile into a spy balloon that probably cost about $35, and we'll make sure we do it over the ocean as it crossed the entire country. But don't talk about it. We don't want to hear about it. Do you wonder when it comes to conspiracy theories that they load up on so much information that you forget about it by the next week, and then as time goes on you look back and you say, this is crazy, why did we only talk about this for 2 days? What did we move on from? And we were distracted from something else. Have you ever just sat back and looked at a year, for example, like in 2024, we had weird things that happened in January of 24, and then by December you look back at the year and go, huh, that was weird. Why did we stop talking about that?
It happens all the time. It happens almost every year. Something bad will happen, and then something worse will happen to make you forget about what happened recently. And as a collective, people just completely forget. And when you bring it up, they're like, what happened?
Yeah, and they'll be like, "Oh, I forgot that happened. That was very strange. What was going on there?" And it really does seem like an overload, so people get distracted. And then you look at getting back to news cycles that very unless it's a massive story, unless it's something election related, war related, or something, that it does carry on through a weekend into the next week. But a lot of stories, mm, something breaks. We're recording this on a Monday. It's a Monday in the afternoon. And then let's say something big happened in the country right now. By Friday, 5 o'clock, it'll be done. Why? Because the media people who've been pushing it, well, that's the time they're clocking out for the weekend. They're going to get margaritas tonight. It's Friday. Hey, it's not Friday, it's Fry-yay, right? And then by Monday, it's a new news cycle of something else that we're supposed to be offended about, titillated about, emotional about. And it's just this vicious cycle. And it just seems to me that it's a way of learned helplessness for a lot of people.
The problem is people have been programmed to think emotionally and cast logic aside. They want you to feel bad for certain groups of people. I don't I got to watch what I say there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I,
it's
I
like
know what you mean, though. Yes.
yeah, like they want you to feel bad, and it's not good because you got to use logic because emotions will only lead you to failure.
Well, that's what we're going for now is common sense. We need to bring common sense back. Again, you can question things. I don't care if you're liberal. I don't care if you're conservative. I don't care if you're libertarian. I don't care what it is. I think having you have a question about something when it comes to politics, with religion, with culture, that should be brought up. And we should have a rational adult conversation about these things instead of yelling about it. I used to, I would say 10 years ago, I used to be all about a good debate. Like, let's get together. Okay, I believe this, you believe something the opposite. What can we do to bring our sides together, find some type of common ground and work it out? And then as time went on, when Trump became president, and it was, no, anyone who voted for him or supported him is a Nazi, and we don't like Nazis. Nazis don't have an opportunity to have a platform anywhere. So you are now castigated outside that aforementioned Overton window of acceptable discourse. And I'm going, wait a second, no, I didn't say anything Nazi like. All I said is this, or anybody who would say that. So eventually debate got shut down. Maybe we're going to get to a point where we do have debates again, where we can have some type of common sense discourse in our country. But am I confident that'll happen? Probably not. Probably not. But I think the best debates happen when, if you are somebody who is a libertarian, where you have an open borders libertarian and a closed borders libertarian, where at least there's a prevailing I guess shared ideology there. It's just different vehicles in order to get there. Or if you're somebody who looks at that, let's say you're a Republican, but one is a neocon who's all about more war with against Iran and supportive of Israel and Ukraine, and then you have more someone who's less hawkish and thinks that we should cut off funding to Israel and Ukraine and all these other countries, but you have the same political ideology. That's where debates happen. But if you're talking about a far left type of Bernie Sanders liberal and somebody who's way more of like a Pat Buchananite on the right, I don't see it really I don't see a debate happening because somebody's going to try and shut it down outside the venue.
Yeah, see, I when it comes to me, like I'm not going to call myself a Republican or a conservative. I'm for common sense. I feel like we should all be able to sit at the same table and eat, you know, but I'll tell you this, like even though I have my beliefs, cuz cuz I literally like most of my friends like pretty much walked away from me once I started, actually putting my opinions out. Like they started calling me every name in the book, but I still stood for what I personally believed in because I thought that the direction we were going was terrible. But I still have like a couple of my friends, like my one of my best friends, Sean. He's actually like, he's a self-proclaimed socialist, and we are still able, to hang out. You know, it's politics is like certain friends of mine. We're still able to have a conversation. We're still, but for the most part, you're right. Like everybody's trying to cut each other off. They're quick to throw away years of friendship just because you believe differently than them. And that's not right.
Yeah, of course. And there was one time, I would say during the Obama years, where, yeah, I didn't vote for the guy. I didn't really care for his presidency, especially his second half. I thought it got really, the 2013 to 2016 time of Obama was very dangerous as far as the a lot of the social stuff that was coming to the forefront, and the rise of certain movements, and saying that Obama's only scandal was he wore a tan suit one time to a press conference. And we're like, no, not really. But there was a time where I had people. My girlfriend at the time was a big. She claimed she was an independent, but it's really interesting that she's voted Democrat every election cycle and was an Elizabeth Warren supporter in 2020 and voted for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. Um, but we could still get together. It's like, okay, we may not talk politics now, but we have other things in common. Then it turned into, no, the politics started at the beginning. And I remembered right around this time, 8 years ago, there was a discussion. Can you date somebody who has different political beliefs than you? And I said, yes, you can, but it depends on values. So if you are somebody who is more, and I hate using this language of pro-life, pro-choice, but I'll use it for the sake of the argument, that let's say a guy is very pro-life, but a woman is pro-choice, it's probably not going to work out too well in a relationship because it could it maybe, but there's a sense of values that get played into it. Now, that's my belief. Now, the other side would say, no, you don't even swipe right on that person if it's on a dating app. So I was last single around this time about 8 years ago, right before in that time when Trump was president elect. And I remembered going on there. It was my last time being single and looking through Tinder and Bumble and seeing the amount of people. If you voted for Trump or support Trump, swipe left. I don't want any Nazis. I don't want any of this. I'm like, well, at least at least it's a good opportunity. You're already putting it out there going, okay, well, I could see that you're somebody who's pretty irrational and I don't really want to deal with it. Again, not saying that people can't be Democrat or Republican or anything like that, but if it's a shared sense of values that you have that does not match up, if your shared values don't match up, then probably the relationship is not going to work out well either.
Yeah, your political ideology doesn't really like, it's either you're crazy or you're not. You know, and there's been a lot of crazy going on, like the whole world as I knew it has been like it's completely different from the 90s. Like I'll tell you, like people are way different. Nobody's friendly anymore. Like here in South Carolina, it's like it used to be, you know, you'd see somebody, you know, walking on a bike path, you could be like, hey, what's going on? But now they just look at you funny. Like everybody is just so quick nowadays to just, I don't know.
Well, people live online, and the worst thing about the lockdowns of a couple of years ago was, well, I mean, there was a lot of worse things of drug addiction and suicide that were going on, but a lot of it was the social anxiety that people had when things reopened. They didn't know how to talk to each other. And the worst part of all of that, too, is that children who had lived online for a couple of years didn't know how to talk. I mean, they lost social skills with other kids. So yeah, people don't learn to talk to each other because they got into a comfort zone of being on a headset, and then that plays into a lot of roles of being somebody who's not very online. Now, you and I are right around the same age. I'm 36. So we remember a time when the internet was the internet. It was the Wild West. There was forums. There were all the AOL Instant Messenger and everything like that. And
I
then
was an IRC junkie.
what's that?
I was an IRC junkie.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I had the AOL Instant Messenger. I think it was Wicked Penguin 92 was my thing, and that was still around up until about 2015, 2016. Then eventually it went away. I not that I was using it, but it was cool that I still had that. And it's still on my Facebook, I believe. But there was always a time of whatever goes on online is online. But then there's real life, that we have real life, that you got to get off your computer and touch grass, breathe some fresh air, go for a walk, go for a bike ride, join a bowling league or a softball league or something. Do something, get out of the house. Well, now we have lived online for so long that there's an entire generation, there might be even a generation and a half, who don't know anything other than living online, that their friends are online people who live in different states, different countries. And if they do have friends that they see at school, they don't talk to them as much at school and then hang out after school. They hang out on their headset and they play Fortnite with the kid who lives next door. So now the line has been blurred between fantasy world and reality to the point where people are making reality their fantasy and fantasy their reality. And it's a real scary time, especially with AI, the rise of AI.
Oh, that's terrifying. The stuff the AI I've seen, like, there's a band that I like. They're called A Day to Remember. You ever listen to them?
Oh, I saw him live last year. Yep.
Oh, I saw them live last year too. That was my second time seeing them. But there's actually an AI video of it's just the singer, but he's covering "Stan" by Eminem, and the entire video, him, the background, everything, guitar playing in the background, it's all AI generated. Like nothing about it is real. And I'm like, this is where we are now.
You don't need to have. I've played so much AI songs on my podcast. Some of my favorites are the Creed AI because we live in the resurgence of Scott Stapp and Creed nowadays, and the AI. If you're a band like I always use Red Hot Chili Peppers for example, is that all you need to do is just put out a bunch of songs that say California, 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 in the style of Anthony Kiedis, and the style of Flea on the bass and John on the guitar and Chad Smith on the drums. And you can, they don't, they can tour on songs that were created with AI that they have nothing to do with. Somebody just, oh, just do a Red Hot Chili Pepper song who talks about California, but that sounds like Give It Away from 1991 and Blood Sugar Sex Magic, but update it to make it sound like it was in 2025. You could do all that and it sounds fine. And it's only going to get better. So I always say this. I look out for people who are artists, who are actors, who are comedians, that their jobs might be going by the wayside at some point. Yeah, there's going to be a time where the radio people, the traffic person you hear on the radio every morning who talks about the backup on the highway and the backup here, that's not a real person. That's going to be AI, and it's going to be within a couple of years. So I feel bad for starving artists. Well, I've been doing a little bit of acting this past year myself, but going forward, the starving artists of the world, they're going to have to contend with technology, and I don't think anyone is ready for this.
Yeah, I do not like at all that AI, it looks like they're trying to get AI to take over everything, and it's terrifying, man. Like soon, like it's almost as if they experimented with COVID. They got us all, they experimented with the fact that they could get us to stay home, stay 6 feet apart, wear mask while we're driving alone in our cars, you know. So it's like, what's going to happen when all of a sudden you no longer have to leave your home because you got AI powered robots that are doing all the jobs, making the money, and then you got Amazon that's doing like delivery. Your groceries can be delivered to you. McDonald's is being delivered to you now. Like, when's it gonna stop? Like,
Well, it's the old Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum is that you will eat the bugs, you will own nothing, and you will be happy.
like
So they always say what project was it 2030 or Agenda 2030, I believe it's called, that we would get to that point. My conspiracy, you want to talk about conspiracy theory? I Here's my prediction, but it's also a theory, is we will not own vehicles at some point. That we will have some type of Uber service pick us up every day. You would pay a monthly fee the way we do with Netflix and Hulu, where you can get all this information, all the entertainment you want for a small fee. That we will own no cars, but there would be no traffic and there would be no excuse if you're late to work. You would say, hey, I got to get to work. It takes 18 minutes for me to get to work and I got to be there and clock in at 9 o'clock. Okay, so what I'll do is every morning the Uber will be outside my house at 8:40. I get to work at the exact time that it says it was supposed to. And there it is. It cuts down in the carbon emissions. It's a cyber truck that picks me up, all of this fun stuff. We'll own nothing. That's why you got to make sure that you have books. Like I got a bookshelf behind me. You make sure you have CDs and DVDs. You make sure you keep all that because eventually in the digital world, there are going to be a couple of things that are going to be changed. They're going to be stealth edited. That things that you remembered, like thinking that Sinbad starred in a genie movie from the mid 90s, or the Berenstain Bears or Nelson Mandela died in 1990 and not 2013. We're not going to know what's real and what's fantasy anymore, and it's gonna be an interesting time. And I think part of the conspiracy theory type of podcasts and things that and conversations that you and I are having right now are good because it makes people not feel like they're going to get caught by with their pants down when this stuff is going to be an eventuality.
well, here you go. One of my theories that I have is you noticed that nobody really talked about the Mandela effect until 2012, right?
Correct.
Like that's when it first started being a thing. So in 2012, everybody was freaking out because they're like, "Oh God, the Mayan calendar, the world's gonna end." But what happened on December 21st, 2012, was there was one of the largest earthquakes in the world that hit Chile, and it actually knocked the planet off of its axis just by a little bit. So maybe that's why people started having alternate memories, because once the planet shifted, just by that little bit, it put us in the same trajectory as an alternate. I don't know if you believe in the multiverse. I kind of do. But like an alternate universe that lives concurrent with ours. And now we're in the same trajectory.
I
Like,
I, I kind of I kind of buy that too, because my belief is that when the Mayan calendar ended on 2012, is that when they said that that's when the end of the world is going to be. Well, you think about what's gone on since then, you you wonder if that was the end of the world, or at least the end of the world as we knew it. When everybody wants to go back to a certain time and they're like, "Oh, things were easier in the 90s, things were easier in the 80s. What happened? Why are we at this point?" Well, what has happened since that around that time, as you mentioned? A lot has changed in our world. The world of 2012, that yeah, there was a crazy election, there was stuff going on and everything, but it's foreign compared to where it is now. There was Facebook, but it was very archaic compared to what we see from the meta world now. Not everyone was on Instagram yet. I think Vine was just starting, and Twitter was just a means for. It was like a Facebook status, but you would break news a little bit quicker. Now everything has really been altered, and as you said, kind of has, had its access tipped a little bit, and that's why I think there's a lot of credence to believing that the end of the world as we knew it did occur at that date in 2012.
well, who's to say that the world didn't? Who's to say that the world didn't end? And this is all the simulation everybody's been talking about. Because, like, look at all these terrible events that have happened since 2012. Things have gotten progressively worse and worse every year. And before then, it wasn't that bad. Like now we got shootings every other week. People, are killing each other for the last Thanksgiving turkey at Walmart. You know,
Yeah, I
it's
mean, well, what happened like 2 weeks before the end of the world supposedly was Sandy Hook. It was right around that time, and ever since then, it just seemed like every week there's been a school shooting, and there's been more arguments, and that's another one where you want to talk about a debate that no one has ever really had the true conversation of, we need to do something about guns. We need to have a conversation about guns. And you say, okay, let's have a conversation. Okay, well, if you have a gun, that means you're overcompensating for the fact that you have a small penis. Like, wait, what? That's not a debate. You think that's a millennial clapback. I don't go by that kind of stuff. And it's just I would love to get to a point where we can have that discourse again, but I think more of us, you and I and others, are having these conversations. These are getting into normal people's houses. They saw this stuff a couple of years ago with the COVID insanity. It was insanity. It was hysteria. And now people are waking up and saying, was that all worth that? That we couldn't see our family members. We couldn't do any of this. Was there a reason that we were separated from people? Was this a way that they wanted that the government worked with these pharmaceutical companies to get the compliance of all of us to roll our sleeves up for this experimental gene therapy and all this other stuff going on? That conversation is not being just had by you and I and Sam Tripoli and Alex Jones. These are random people who are our neighbors. That this is not everyone is living in this uh, living on autopilot and acting like an NPC. They're actually asking these questions, and it's frightening legacy media, and it's frightening the government as well. And things are really changing in real time. And I'm honestly, that aspect, I actually am here for it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've seen, man, the stuff that I've seen. There was like, okay, here's a conspiracy. What's his name? David Hogg. Okay. What is this dude hanging out? Why is this dude hanging out in places where there's school shootings? Because dude was at a school in Florida where there was a shooting, and then he goes to California. I forget the school that he went to, but he was there and did an interview there when a shooting happened. Like, I mean, why is this dude, doing interviews before shootings happen? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he was a useful idiot. He was because a couple of his classmates were tragically killed at Marjorie Stoneman, the high school in Parkland, Florida. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but to make it seem like he was one of the human shields, and he was no, he was. I don't even think he was in school that day. But him and Emma Gonzalez, who I think is a transgender or non-binary individual now, I think she goes by X. I think that's her name. That it seemed like you were more political propagandists at the time and not people who were very concerned. I understand that there are those who might be, because it happens to them, that they're going to be a little bit stricter on certain things, or just like if you're a mother of a son who died of drug addiction, you would be somebody who's like, yeah, we got to do something about this war on drugs, got to figure something out. I understand that happens, but yeah, it's very convenient that he's there to speak on this. And he ends up getting, yeah, he gets into Harvard, I believe, even though he didn't have the grades for it. But it just worked out. It was politically feasible for him. But things are really getting upended. The DEI industry is going by the wayside right now. There's a lot of things that are being gutted. And a lot of the craziness from 2013 that we saw since the end of the world in 2012, all the way up until the last couple of years with the Summer of Love in 2020, is that things are getting reversed. Things are getting upended now, and it's good to see. I think it's very heartening, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons why I'm kind of glad I waited to take these steps to try to get into these industries. Was, I wouldn't have lasted at all in that political climate. Like, because uh,
Because
yeah.
again, you said you're not a true like rock ribbed Republican. It's you're asking questions, but in those Hollywood circles, or not even just Hollywood, local productions, if they find out that you supported a candidate that the group did not, you're not going to be involved in this production. You can't be a gaffer. You can't be the lighting guy. You can't be somebody who's one of the producers of the show, or whatever it is, even in an independent film. It turned into a cult mentality instead of saying, yeah, no, there are things I disagree with this guy and this guy and this guy about. And it's like, nope, but there's a hard line. And that's what's been really tough. And I see this in the stand-up comedy industry, is that a lot of shows, you have a lot of people with very shared, similar political opinions that end up being cast on these shows, and that's why it's good to have alternative media and having an alternative site to do this stuff.
Oh yeah, that's why, because I've done work on a couple of productions for HBO. I've been on The Righteous Gemstones, I've been on Vice Principals, and one thing that, because I've always kept my politics to myself. I refuse to talk politics when I'm on set, because you can make enemies real quick. Like yeah, like there was these two guys that were sitting by me while we were in the waiting room, and they was talking about Elizabeth Warren this and how Pete Buttigieg is doing so good for the travel industry, and I'm just sitting there in my head just laughing my head off, like, you guys actually believe this? Yet we've had two major train derailments in Ohio, you know, because Pete Buttigieg couldn't even do his job. He was put in charge of travel and, uh,
Oh, and remember, for people at the time, again, this is more stuff. That was 2 years ago. It wasn't even 2 years ago. It was right around this time, though, in East Palestine, Ohio. I visited. I've been to East Palestine. I remember it was going on at the time, and I visited right after the disaster because it's only about an hour or so from me. Um, that Pete Buttigieg, as there is a mushroom cloud that is on the border of Ohio and Pennsylvania, and people should know where that is located, that there are a lot of rivers and streams that head on down towards the Ohio River, which is one of the biggest rivers in the entire country. A lot of that was getting into waterways and heading on down. It was a huge disaster. And at the time, Pete Buttigieg was on a panel talking about how the bridges in Long Island are racist. That's true. Now, no, what he said is false. It's not racist. They weren't trying to keep black people out. Robert Moses purposely, yes, had bridges that were a little shorter than normal because he wanted to keep poor people out. It wasn't just poor black people, it was poor white people, poor Hispanics, poor whatever. DPs, as they call them, displaced persons. He didn't want them to go out to Montauk and Patchogue and all these other places out in Long Island. So it wasn't racist bridges, but that's what he was more concerned about at the time. It's all this other craziness that happened that is getting reversed now. That as again, an entire city, an entire region is wondering, are we even allowed to be here? Can we drink the water? Can I bathe today? And he's there talking about bridges from 100 years ago being racist. And you're like, where are your priorities? Well, that's the priority, apparently.
I mean, like I was in Michigan a few years ago, right? Like I was driving through downtown Detroit, and like you look up at the sky and you're seeing skyscrapers that are completely boarded up. And at the time, that was during the water. The water got, what's that word I'm looking for? The water.
Contaminated.
Thank you. In Flint, so you couldn't even really use the water to even cook, you know. But it's like, why are they not focusing? Like, why are they worrying about giving free housing to migrants and kicking, you're basically, what was happening in Michigan was they was charging people for not using the water. And if you didn't use the water, eventually they'd serve you an eviction notice. Once you got kicked out, a migrant came and they got your house.
Yeah.
They were punishing you for not using the water there.
Well, that's one of the big conspiracy theories is that that I lend credence to is that it seemed like it was replacement. It was great replacement. It wasn't necessarily about race. It was about replacing political demographics and to get into certain communities and give them a path to citizenship in order to vote, and that they tend to vote for a certain political party that allows them into the country. At the same time, another conspiracy theory is what was going on in Appalachia, of which there was the crack epidemic of the 1980s that really hit the black community, and there's been a lot of people, and I would believe it, that it seemed like it was a way to increase the welfare state and punish poor black people who were subject to these situations. It broke up families. It created more out of wedlock children that were being raised in abject poverty. And then by the 90s, you were seeing, well, how do we affect other communities as well? And they started doing it with heroin, but you got to go first with the prescription drugs. And you had the Sackler family that was pushing this, especially in West Virginia, towns that had been already decimated by the poor economy and jobs that were leaving. And then you throw in some pills for minor injuries or just general discomfort. You know what? My knee has been bothering me. You know, this weather, it happens. Well, why don't you take a pill for it? You don't need to be in discomfort. Well, what happens then? Okay, my prescription's up. I got to find something that's going to be a lot cheaper. So then they lean towards heroin and fentanyl and everything. And it was really doing so much damage to these areas because it just seemed like people live on the coast, people live in Washington, the media that's in New York really couldn't care less about people like you and I from South Carolina and Ohio. That whatever, oh, Michigan, yeah, it doesn't really matter, not a big deal. Oh, East Palestine had a train derailment. Oh, that's a shame, too bad. Oh, there was a massive hurricane that instead of hitting the coast of North Carolina, went all the way up the French Broad River into Asheville. Yeah, those people, yeah, a bunch of hillbillies. Who cares about them? Yeah, I care about them. I care about what's happening to my community, my nation. I was born here, and I care about the people who are here, and it just seems that that has gone by the wayside, and it's time to really start to focus on what really matters in this country instead of flooding our country with so many people who do not share our values. And again, it's not a race thing. It's just it's breaking up the culture and the community that we have already had here, and I think it was all done by design.
Yeah, we cannot coexist with, groups that want to go into like Target and ransack the place and not having, nobody gets arrested, nobody has any accountability anymore. Like that's the kind of environment that I guess we're getting out of now, but that's what we've been used to the last, 5, 6 years.
Well, yeah, the accountability culture. Hopefully, we are bringing back common sense and accountability finally. Well, I gotta say, Cal, this has been a fun conversation. We talked off the air. We're like, oh, well, we haven't really we can talk about anything, and you said I'm an open book, and it seemed to me that this has been very fun, very eye opening for a lot of people. And again, let's get the plugs out. Where can we find you on social media? We can find you on YouTube, and anything you have in the hopper as far as your acting credits go.
Okay, so far I've, basically just been a glorified background extra. Like at first I got into it because some friends of mine, they're in the industry, so I was able to get my feet wet. But yeah, so far like they used me like 7 or 8 times for season 4 of The Righteous Gemstones, and I was like, you know what? I want to get my feet even further. I wouldn't have done this before. Yeah, I'm actually quite timid in person. It takes a while for me to get comfortable. But this seems pretty natural to me.
Yeah, I mean, and again, with what we're talking about, 5, 10 years ago, you wouldn't be even thought of, and as far as being an actor or going on stage at a comedy show or anything. And now we've given a big pulsating middle finger to all of that and the means of distribution, saying, you know what, then I'll create my own podcast. Then, if you're not going to have me on here, hey, maybe I'll go in more of a like-minded area of directors, or open-minded, I should say, that an open-minded production where it doesn't really matter anyone's political views. We just want to make a good product, and that's what we're doing going forward. And I'm very grateful in this new age of social media and YouTube and podcasting and streaming and whatever else, whatever the future, the near and distant future of this medium is going to be. So I'm very excited about that. Well, Kelly, it was great talking to you. Definitely keep in touch. And we'll, yeah. Unfortunately, I won't be able to see you this weekend because I got to work and everything. But good luck with the Acronomicon, weird name for it. But yeah, and yeah, best of luck going forward. And I appreciate you coming on.
Hey, I appreciate you having me.
And I appreciate you folks for listening and watching this podcast. Yes, it's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for free, and it's up on Patreon for free. But if you want more episodes where I do get into a lot of these very similar conversations and topics, go to my Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And I'll be back with you with another free episode of the Check Your Brain podcast coming up next week. Bye, everyone.